How much is a father's life worth? At my son's lavish Christmas dinner surrounded by crystal and fake smiles, I discovered the answer: $2 million. That was the price he and his wife had placed on my head. But they made one fatal mistake. They didn't realize they weren't dealing with a frail old man. They were dealing with a forensic accountant who had spent a lifetime exposing frauds just like them, and their account was officially past due. The lie began in their opulent mansion in Buckhead, Atlanta. Everything was a performance of wealth. The air was thick with the scent of pine from a Christmas tree so large it scraped the vaulted ceiling, its branches heavy with glittering ornaments that looked cold to the touch. Soft jazz music drifted from hidden speakers, a soulless soundtrack to a soulless evening. I sat at the head of a long mahogany table, the polished surface reflecting the cold light of a crystal chandelier. It was all perfect, too perfect, like a photograph in a magazine meant to sell a life no one actually lived. My gaze fell upon my son Darius. He wore a Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, a new acquisition since I had last seen him. It was a timepiece worth more than his annual salary. Across from him, his wife Simone smiled, a diamond necklace I had never seen before resting against her collarbone. I did the math in my head. The watch, the necklace, the extravagant party, it didn't add up. I knew Darius's finances better than he did. The numbers were screaming fraud. Simone raised her champagne flute, the diamonds on her fingers scattering light across the room. A toast, she announced, her voice as smooth and sweet as honey. To Christmas and to the many successes our family has ahead. Darius joined in, raising his own glass. He looked directly at me, his smile wide but empty. To success, he echoed. We just closed a massive real estate deal, a commercial property downtown. It's going to be a game changer for us. I knew instantly it was a lie, a poorly constructed one. I had audited enough fake deals to recognize the empty words. Then he turned to me, his expression shifting to one of feigned concern. He walked over and placed a tall glass of filtered water by my plate. "Something special for you, Dad," he said, his voice low. "It's better for your health." I picked up the glass, my fingers brushing against his. They were cold. An unsettling premonition washed over me, a silent alarm ringing in the deepest part of my mind. I looked at the clear liquid, and for the first time in my life I felt a genuine sense of fear. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the water. It was cold, clean, and tasteless. Yet no sooner had the liquid touched my tongue than a strange warmth began to spread from my throat down into my chest. It wasn't a pleasant warmth. It was a chemical, invasive heat that felt entirely out of place. I set the glass down, my hand suddenly feeling heavy, disconnected from my arm. The sounds of the dinner party, the soft clinking of silverware, and the low hum of conversation began to fade into a dull, distant roar. My focus narrowed to the heavy, rhythmic thudding in my chest, which was growing louder and more erratic with every beat. Then came the pain. It wasn't the sharp, stabbing pain I had read about. It was a dull, heavy pressure, as if a lead weight had been placed directly on my sternum, slowly pressing the air from my lungs. A wave of dizziness washed over me, so intense that the crystal chandelier above seemed to sway and blur into a smear of light. My stomach churned with a sudden, violent nausea. My first thought, the one programmed by years of health warnings and common knowledge, was a heart attack. At 68 years old, it was a grimly logical conclusion. But as the seconds ticked by my mind, the disciplined mind of a forensic accountant instinctively began to reject that conclusion. It started an audit of its own accord, a systematic review of the facts as they were presenting themselves. My entire career was built on finding inconsistencies, on recognizing when the numbers on a page didn't tell the truth. I now applied that same cold logic to the symptoms racking my body. Data point 1, the chest pain. It was severe, yes, but it remained localized. A classic heart attack often involves pain radiating down the left arm or up into the jaw. This was a deadweight, stagnant and centered. An anomaly. Data point 2, the dizziness. Its onset was almost instantaneous after I drank the water. A cardiovascular event typically has a more gradual buildup. This felt more like a system shock, an external agent introduced into the equation. Another anomaly. Data point 3, the nausea. While it could accompany a heart attack, combined with the other atypical data, it pointed towards a different conclusion. The pieces didn't fit. The ledger didn't balance. This wasn't a random, catastrophic failure of my body's systems. This felt methodical. It felt engineered. My professional instincts, honed over 40 years of uncovering deception, screamed that I was not a victim of biology, but of a deliberate act. My mind raced back, searching for the variable, the one new entry into the system right before the crash: the water. The special glass of water my son had so thoughtfully provided. As if sensing my internal chaos, Darius leaned forward, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern. "Dad, are you okay?" he asked, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "You look pale." I forced my eyes to focus on his, and in that moment I saw it. It was a flicker, a micro-expression lasting less than a second, but it was there. Behind the worried brow and the concerned tone, his eyes held a cold, predatory glint. It was the look of a man not worried about a conclusion, but eagerly awaiting one. There was no fear for my well-being, only a chilling anticipation. It was the final piece of data I needed. The audit was complete. The conclusion was undeniable. I gathered every ounce of strength I had, forcing a weak smile. "Just a little tired, son," I managed to say, my voice raspy. I pushed my chair back slowly, placing my hand on my chest for dramatic effect. "I think I just need a moment. A bit of fresh air might do me good." It was the beginning of my own performance, my counterplay in a game I had just discovered I was losing. Leaving the table wasn't just an escape. It was a strategic retreat to find a new vantage point. I needed to get off his territory, away from the scene of the crime, before he could see that his intended victim was now officially the lead investigator. I pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen, the sudden silence a stark contrast to the party's murmur. The room was a gleaming expanse of stainless steel and white marble, immaculate and cold. I leaned against a small side table, pretending to catch my breath, my mind racing to process the terrifying suspicion that was now taking root. My hand brushed against a stack of mail left carelessly near the edge. With a calculated, shaky movement that I hoped looked like an old man's stumble, I knocked the pile to the floor, scattering envelopes across the polished tiles. "Oh, for goodness sake," I muttered to myself, a piece of theater for an audience of one. I knelt down slowly, my joints protesting, and began to gather the letters. Bill magazine, and then my heart stopped cold. It was a large manila envelope with a familiar logo in the corner. Prudential Financial, my life insurance company. But I hadn't received any mail from them in months. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It had already been opened. I slid the documents out. The formal, unforgiving print seemed to leap off the page. It was a new policy. A $2 million policy taken out on my life just 3 months ago. My eyes scanned down to the bottom line, the line that seals destinies and motives. Beneficiary Darius Monroe. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. $2 million. It was a number, a motive, a death sentence. The dull pain in my chest suddenly sharpened, no longer a physical symptom, but the piercing agony of betrayal. This was the missing entry in the ledger, the dark figure that made all the other anomalies make perfect, horrifying sense. Just then I heard his footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approaching the kitchen door. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. My eyes darted around the room, a wild search for something, anything. And then I saw it. Tucked behind a tall vase of white lilies, almost completely hidden, was a small glass vial. It was the kind used for medicine droppers, and it was nearly empty save for a single clear, viscous drop clinging to the bottom. My mind made the final sickening connection in an instant. The policy was the why. This vial was the how. With a surge of adrenaline, I snatched the vial and shoved it deep into my coat pocket, along with the crinkling insurance documents, just as the kitchen door swung open. Darius stood there, filling the doorway. He wasn't smiling anymore. His eyes were narrow, analytical, sweeping the room, and then settling on me, kneeling on the floor. I heard a noise, he said, his voice flat, devoid of any concern. I used the table to slowly pull myself up, making sure my movements were frail and unsteady. I held up the mail I had gathered. "Just clumsy old me," I said, my voice a convincing imitation of weary age. "I think this old man has had enough excitement for one night. I'm going to head home." I walked towards him, towards the only exit. He didn't move, forcing me to brush past him. I could feel his eyes boring into my back as I walked away, the weight of the evidence in my pocket feeling as heavy as a tombstone. The silent confrontation was over. I had survived, and I had the proof. Now the real audit was about to begin. The heavy door of the taxi clicked shut, sealing me inside a small, anonymous world of worn leather and the faint scent of air freshener. It was my sanctuary. For the first time since leaving my son's house, I could finally let the mask of frailty slip. The city of Atlanta slid by the window, a blur of Christmas lights and hurried shoppers, each a tiny drama, unaware of the life and death theater I was currently starring in. My mind was a whirlwind of calculations and shock, but beneath it all, a cold, hard resolve was beginning to form. My initial instruction to the driver had been vague, a simple request to head downtown. I needed time. I needed a secure location to process the raw data of betrayal. Going home was not an option. My home was no longer a safe house. It was the place my son expected me to die. Just as that chilling thought solidified, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Darius. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through me, sharp and clean. This was it. The first move in the chess match. The first question in the interrogation. He was beginning his follow-up, checking on the progress of his investment. I let it ring twice more, a calculated delay to reinforce my performance as a tired, disoriented old man. Then I took a deep, steadying breath, composed my features into an expression of exhaustion, and answered deliberately, making my voice weak and breathy. "Hello, son," I rasped. "Dad." "It's me. I was just calling to make sure you got home all right." "You left so suddenly, we were all worried," he said. The words were perfect, each one polished with the veneer of filial concern. But I was an expert in veneers. I had spent my life peeling them back to find the rot underneath. I listened not to what he said, but to what he didn't say. "Yes, yes. The driver is just pulling onto my street now." I lied smoothly, the falsehood tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'm just very tired, Darius. This old body isn't what it used to be." There was a slight pause on his end. "Are you sure you're okay? You looked really pale. I can call Dr. Evans for you, have him meet you at the house." It was another test, a baited question. He wanted me to describe my symptoms. He needed to know if the poison was working as expected. A truly worried son would have asked, "Is your chest still hurting? Are you still dizzy?" But Darius's questions were open-ended, designed to extract information without revealing his own knowledge. It was a classic intelligence-gathering technique, and he was clumsy at it. No, that won't be necessary," I insisted, adding a slight cough for effect. "Don't you and Simone worry about me. A good night's sleep is all the medicine I need. I'll call you in the morning." "Okay, Dad, if you say so." "Sleep well," he said, and the line went dead. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, my mind colder and clearer than ever before. The audit of that conversation was swift and brutal. The timing of the call, the vague questions, the subtle pressure for details, it all pointed to one thing: he needed confirmation. He needed to know I was alone, isolated, and succumbing to what everyone would assume was a natural, tragic event. My decision was made. Going home was walking into a coffin. My personal doctor could be influenced or too slow. I needed a sterile environment, an official record, an unimpeachable chain of evidence. I leaned forward, my voice no longer weak but firm with newfound purpose. "Driver," I said, "change of plans. Take me to the emergency entrance at Emory University Hospital, and please step on it." The automatic doors of the Emory University Hospital emergency room slid open with a soft whoosh, admitting me into a world of controlled chaos. The air was sterile, sharp with the scent of antiseptic, a stark contrast to the rich aromas of my son's Christmas feast. Bright, unforgiving fluorescent lights hummed overhead, reflecting off the polished linoleum floors. Around me was the typical tableau of a city hospital on a holiday night: a child crying with a fever, a man with a bandaged hand, nurses moving with swift, practiced efficiency. In this sea of urgent personal dramas, I was an island of cold, quiet purpose. This clinical, impersonal place was exactly what I needed. Here facts mattered more than feelings, and evidence would be processed without bias. I was led to a small cubicle, the thin curtain providing a flimsy illusion of privacy. A young doctor, his face etched with the fatigue of a long shift, entered holding a tablet. "Mr. Monroe," he said, his voice tired but professional. "The nurse said you're experiencing chest pains. We'll start with an EKG and some basic blood work to check your cardiac enzymes." I looked at him, my expression calm and steady. "The EKG will likely be inconclusive, doctor," I stated, my voice even. He paused, surprised by my directness. I am a retired forensic accountant. My life's work involved analyzing data to find anomalies, and I am currently auditing my own symptoms. They are not consistent with a standard cardiac event. The doctor's eyebrows raised slightly. Could you explain? Certainly, I said, laying out the facts as if presenting a case. The pain is a fixed, heavy pressure with no radiation to my arm or jaw. The dizziness and nausea had an extremely rapid onset immediately following the ingestion of a specific glass of water. A natural cardiac event rarely presents with such a clear and immediate trigger. Therefore, I must insist on a comprehensive toxicology screen. I suspect the presence of an external agent, specifically a cardiac glycoside like digoxin. My use of the specific medical term combined with my unwavering analytical tone completely changed his demeanor. The look of a tired physician dealing with another elderly patient vanished, replaced by the focused curiosity of a medical detective. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, Mr. Monroe," he said, his voice now tinged with a new respect. "I'll order a full tox panel. It will take a few hours to get the results back." The hours that followed were a testament to discipline. I sat on the hard gurney, the dull ache in my chest, a constant pulsing reminder of how close I had come to the edge. I was not a patient waiting in fear. I was an investigator waiting for a lab to confirm my findings. I watched the clock on the wall each tick a step closer to the irrefutable truth I knew was coming. I replayed the evening's events in my mind over and over, examining every word, every glance, every gesture from Darius and Simone. The insurance policy and the vial felt heavy in my pocket, physical anchors to the monstrous reality I now faced. There was no grief yet, no time for the pain of betrayal. That would come later. Right now, there was only the case. Finally, the doctor returned, pulling the curtain shut behind him. The professional curiosity was gone from his face, replaced by a look of grim gravity. He held a printout in his hand. "Mr. Monroe." He began, his voice low and serious. "We have your results. Your instincts. They were correct. Frighteningly so." He showed me the paper. I saw my name and next to it a number highlighted in red. "Your blood contains a dangerously high level of digoxin, a level high enough to induce cardiac arrest. If you hadn't come in when you did, your heart could have simply stopped beating within the next few hours. I have to be clear," he said, looking me directly in the eyes. "This is in no way from natural causes. Someone did this to you." I felt no shock. I felt no surprise. I only felt a cold, grim sense of validation. The ledger was balanced. The hidden entry had been found. The suspicion was now a fact certified by science and printed in black and white. It was the first piece of hard evidence, the cornerstone upon which I would build my case and deliver my final, unforgiving audit. I checked into a discreet hotel near the hospital under my wife's maiden name, a precaution that felt both paranoid and entirely necessary. The room was generic anonymous, painted in bland, forgettable shades of beige. It was the perfect, sterile environment for the work I had to do. I sat in the stiff armchair, the city lights of Atlanta glowing coldly outside the window. In front of me on the desk sat my laptop and a cup of black coffee from the lobby, its bitterness a fitting companion for the task ahead. There was no room for grief, not yet. The emotional fallout of my son's betrayal was a storm I would have to weather later. For now, I had to be what I had always been, an auditor. My target was not a corporation's fraudulent books, but the hidden ledger of my son's life. My hands were steady as I opened the laptop. The screen cast a pale blue light on my face in the darkened room. My first target was his Amazon account. It was a long shot, but criminals, especially arrogant ones, often leave a digital trail, a breadcrumb path of their own carelessness. I navigated to the login page and typed in his email address. Then came the password. My mind sifted through years of memories, not of a loving father, but of an observant one. Darius was a creature of habit and ego. His passwords were never complex, always a rotation of the same few elements. I started with the most obvious combination, Simone's birthday, followed by the name of their first dog, a golden retriever named Zeus. I typed it in. Access denied. I took a sip of coffee. I was not discouraged. This was part of the process, eliminating variables. I tried the next logical sequence, the name of his favorite football team, the Falcons, followed by the year he graduated college. Access denied. I paused, closing my eyes, picturing him as a younger man full of bravado and predictable patterns. What was his tell his vanity? He was intensely proud of the date he founded his first and failed consulting business. I typed it in, followed by Simone's initials. The screen flickered and then I was in. The digital door to his life swung wide open. His order history was a catalog of his desperate attempt to project wealth. A $500 cashmere sweater, the newest set of Callaway golf clubs, an expensive espresso machine. It was a pathetic display of financial insecurity. I scrolled down my eyes, scanning past the mundane purchases, looking for the one entry that didn't belong. I went back 1 week, then 2, and then I found it. Sandwiched between an order for leather driving gloves and a subscription for artisanal coffee beans was a single chilling line item. The clinical text seemed to burn on the screen. Product digoxin, liquid solution, 10 milliliter vial. Seller Pharma Global Direct, an online pharmacy based in Cyprus. Delivery date 2 weeks ago. Shipped to Darius Monroe, Buckhead, Atlanta. A profound, deathly stillness settled over me. There was no gasp, no sudden surge of rage. Instead, I felt a deep, resonant coldness, the kind that comes with absolute, irrefutable certainty. It was the moment in an audit when the final damning piece of evidence clicks into place and the entire complex web of lies is laid bare. It was the quiet, terrible satisfaction of being right. All the emotion, all the paternal love I once had was stripped away, leaving only the raw, undeniable data of his premeditation. He had planned this. He had researched it. He had clicked a button and purchased the weapon meant to end my life with the same casual indifference as buying a new pair of shoes. My movements became methodical. I saved the web page as a PDF. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the transaction details. I logged into a secure email account I maintained for sensitive documents and sent the files to myself, creating a time-stamped off-site backup. Each click of the mouse was a nail being hammered into my son's coffin. The hospital had provided the proof of the crime. Now I had the proof of the intent. The case file was growing stronger, and my resolve was hardening into something unbreakable, as cold and unforgiving as the digital evidence now stored safely in the cloud. Back in the sterile anonymity of my hotel room, I laid out the contents of my pockets on the crisp white bedspread. It was a grim collection, a still life of a crime in progress. Each piece was a testament to the night's horrifying discovery. First, I placed the copy of the $2 million insurance policy, its legal jargon a cold translation of my son's bottomless greed. It was the motive. Next to it, I placed the toxicology report from Emory Hospital, the clinical printout detailing the lethal dose of digoxin in my veins. It was the proof of the act itself. Then came the printout of the Amazon order, the digital ghost of a transaction that turned a son into a predator. It was the proof of premeditation. And finally, I took out the small glass vial, now carefully sealed inside a plastic zip-top bag from the hotel room's ice bucket. The tiny clear drop of liquid still inside seemed to mock me with its innocence. It was the weapon. I stood there for a long moment, looking down at the 4 exhibits. My entire life as a father, all the love and sacrifice had been audited and reduced to these 4 pieces of evidence. A case file. My case file. There was a chilling completeness to it, an airtight logic that my professional mind could not help but appreciate even as my heart fractured. My son had been sloppy. He had underestimated me, viewing me not as a man who had built a career on sniffing out such pathetic deceptions, but as an old man, a final asset to be liquidated. It was time to disabuse him of that notion. My hands were perfectly steady as I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was the private line for Lawrence Hayes, my lawyer for over 30 years and one of the few men on earth I trusted implicitly. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. Elijah. A bit late for a Christmas call, isn't it? I did not return the pleasantry. Larry, I said, my voice low and devoid of emotion. I have a case for you. I need your counsel. Of course, Elijah. What's going on? Is everything all right? I took a breath. It's a case of insurance fraud and attempted murder. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp legal mind. Okay, he said slowly. Whose? Mine, I replied. I then proceeded to walk him through the evidence one piece at a time with the same dispassionate clarity I would use to present a financial audit to a corporate board. I detailed the discovery of the policy, the atypical symptoms, the doctor's diagnosis, and the digital receipt. I spoke without anger, without sadness, simply stating the facts as they were. When I finished, the silence on the other end was heavy with a mixture of shock and fury. That ungrateful, greedy... He began, his professional decorum completely shattering, replaced by the raw anger of a friend. Elijah, I'm hanging up and calling the police right now. We'll have them pick up Darius and that wife of his tonight. They'll spend the rest of Christmas in a holding cell. No, I said, my voice firm, stopping him cold. No. What do you mean? No, Elijah, he tried to kill you. And for that, he will face justice, I said. But the police will only give him the justice of the state. I intend to deliver a more personal, more complete form of justice. A prison sentence is not enough. He needs to understand the full cost of his actions. He needs to lose everything he was trying to steal. Larry, this needs to be served perfectly without any loose ends. I could feel his astonishment through the phone. Then his anger subsided, replaced by a dawning understanding of familiar professional admiration. He recognized the man he had known for decades. The meticulous planner. The master strategist. My God, Elijah, he breathed. Even now you're thinking 3 steps ahead. 5 steps, Larry, I corrected him gently. And I need your help to set the board. I have a plan. The following morning found me not in a hospital bed or a hotel room, but in the familiar, reassuring office of Lawrence Hayes. His law firm occupied the top floor of a skyscraper in downtown Atlanta, and through the panoramic window behind his large oak desk, the city spread out below us, a sprawling map of 1,000,000 different lives. But in this quiet, wood-paneled room, there was only one life that mattered, mine. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 old friends on the brink of a battle, the evidence I had collected laid out neatly on the polished surface of his desk between us. The plan we had formulated over the phone in the early hours of the morning was simple, elegant, and ruthless. It relied on one undeniable constant of human nature: greed. It was time to see just how deep my son's greed ran. Lawrence looked at me, his expression a mixture of concern and grim resolve. Are you ready for this? Elijah, he asked, his hand hovering over the speakerphone button. I gave a single firm nod. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a core of unbreakable, cold resolve. I'm ready, Larry. Make the call. Lawrence took a deep breath, the kind an actor takes before stepping onto the stage. He pressed the button, and the line began to ring. It was a sound that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then a click, and my son's voice filled the room, confident and clear. Darius Monroe speaking. Lawrence's voice instantly transformed. It became heavy, somber, and laced with a carefully measured dose of urgency. Darius, it's Lawrence Hayes. I'm calling about your father. He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. Larry, is everything okay? Darius asked, a hint of something unreadable in his tone. It wasn't quite concern, it was closer to anticipation. I'm afraid not. Son Lawrence continued his performance flawless. He had a very bad night after he left your house on Christmas. A major health scare. He's stable now, but the doctors are, well, they're very concerned. His condition is fragile. Lawrence let out a heavy sigh. He's been thinking a lot about the future, about making things simpler for you and Simone. He's adamant about it, Darius. He wants to transfer his entire estate, all of his assets, over to you as soon as possible. He wants to avoid the lengthy and complicated probate process to make sure you're both taken care of without any legal headaches later on. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken thoughts. And then from the other end of the line we heard it. It was faint, muffled by distance, but unmistakable. It was the sound of a sharp, delighted gasp from Simone in the background, followed by a whispered but clearly audible, "Oh my God." It was the sound of pure, unadulterated avarice, the sound of victory. My eyes met Lawrence's across the desk. He shook his head slowly, his expression one of utter disgust. Darius finally cleared his throat, his voice tight, struggling to contain the excitement bubbling just beneath the surface. He tried to sound sad, but the performance was laughably inept. Oh no, that's just terrible news, Larry. Is he going to be all right? The question was an afterthought, a box he knew he had to check before getting to the real issue. Of course, he continued, his words coming faster now. Of course, we'll do whatever he needs. We'll be there. You just tell us when and where. His appointment is tomorrow, Lawrence said, delivering the final piece of the bait. Can you and Simone be at my office at 2 p.m. to sign the transfer documents? Yes, absolutely. We will be there, Darius confirmed instantly, the eagerness in his voice now completely undisguised. 2 o'clock. Don't worry, Larry. We won't be late. The line went dead. Lawrence leaned back in his leather chair, the silence of the office returning now heavier than before. I heard her. Elijah, he said, his voice low and filled with contempt. She was celebrating. I stared out the window at the city below, but I didn't see the buildings or the traffic. I saw only the clear, cold path ahead. I know, I said softly. The bait has been taken. Now we just wait for them to walk into the trap. The hour leading up to the 2 o'clock meeting was the longest of my life. I sat in a plush leather armchair in Lawrence's office, a silent sentinel watching the city breathe below. The office was my friend's fortress of solitude, a testament to a lifetime spent navigating the complexities of law and human nature. Bookshelves filled with leather-bound legal texts lined one wall, smelling faintly of old paper and wisdom. The desk between us was a vast expanse of polished oak, solid and uncompromising, a fitting stage for the drama that was about to unfold. But the true centerpiece was the floor-to-ceiling window. It offered a panoramic view of Atlanta, the cars like tiny metal insects crawling along the arteries of the city, the skyscrapers piercing the clouds. It was a God's eye view, a reminder of how small and insignificant our personal battles could seem. Yet, in that moment, this room felt like the center of the entire universe. I had spent the morning preparing for my role. I hadn't slept, allowing genuine fatigue to settle into my bones and paint dark circles under my eyes. I chose one of my older suits, one that hung a little looser on my frame, making me appear more diminished, more frail. I practiced a slight tremor in my hands and a shallowness to my breath. When Lawrence had first seen me that morning, a flicker of genuine alarm had crossed his face before he remembered it was a performance. My son and his wife would be expecting to see a dying man, a man defeated by age and illness, a man ready to sign away his life's work. I would not disappoint them. This was the most important audit of my career, and the presentation of the data had to be perfect. At precisely 1:55, the intercom on Lawrence's desk buzzed softly. Mr. Hayes, his assistant's voice announced, Mr. and Mrs. Monroe are here for their 2 o'clock appointment. Lawrence glanced at me, and I gave him a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Send them in, please, he said, his voice the epitome of legal solemnity. The heavy oak doors swung open and they entered. My son and his wife were dressed for a coronation, not a somber family meeting. Simone wore a sharp, black designer dress that probably cost more than my first car, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She was a vision of predatory elegance. Darius wore a tailored Italian suit, the fabric shimmering under the office lights, his Patek Philippe watch deliberately angled to catch the light. They didn't look like a grieving son and daughter-in-law. They looked like business partners who had just closed the deal of a lifetime. They looked like they had already won. Their performance began the moment they saw me. Simone's perfectly painted lips parted in a theatrical gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Elijah," she breathed, rushing to my side. "Oh, my dear, you look so tired." She knelt beside my chair, her expensive perfume filling the air around me. Darius followed his face, a carefully constructed mask of grave concern. He strode over and placed a hand on my shoulder. The touch was not warm or comforting. It was heavy, possessive, the touch of a man claiming his property. "Dad, we're here," Simone said, her voice trembling with expertly faked emotion. She took my hand in hers. Her skin was cool, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't you worry about a single thing. We came as soon as Larry called. We'll take care of everything now. All the paperwork, all the complicated details, you just leave it all to us." Her eyes were wide and full of what was supposed to pass for tears, but I saw through the act. I saw the impatience flickering deep within them, the ravenous hunger of a wolf staring at its long-awaited prize. "She's right, Dad," Darius said, his voice a low, soothing murmur that did not match the cold triumph in his eyes. "You've worked hard your whole life. You've carried the burden long enough. It's time for you to rest. Let us take it from here. It's our turn to take care of you. It's the least we can do after everything you've done for us." Every word was a perfectly polished lie, a weaponized sentiment designed to reassure me, to make me compliant, to get my signature on the bottom line. I looked from my son's face to my daughter-in-law's, and in that moment, the last vestiges of any familial bond I might have clung to simply evaporated. I was not looking at family. I was looking at two hostile actors engaged in a corporate takeover of my life, and I was the sole asset they were trying to liquidate. There was no love here. There was no concern. There was only a terrifying void filled with a greed so profound it had eclipsed their humanity. They were strangers to me now, more alien than any person I might pass on the street below. And I knew with a certainty that was as heartbreaking as it was liberating that I had been right to cut them out of my life's ledger. This was not an act of revenge. It was a necessary correction, a final decisive entry to balance the books once and for all. I let out a weak, rattling sigh, a perfect imitation of a dying man's last reserves of strength. I let my head loll back against the chair and looked up at my son, mustering the most pathetic, trusting expression I could. "Thank you, son," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Thank you for being here." From the corner of my eye, I saw a small, triumphant smile touch Simone's lips before she quickly hid it behind her hand. Lawrence, ever the professional, stepped forward, a thick stack of documents in his hand. "If we're all ready," he said, his voice neutral, "we can begin." Lawrence allowed the silence in the room to stretch, letting the weight of anticipation build until it was almost a physical presence. Darius and Simone were practically vibrating with suppressed excitement, their eyes fixed on the thick cream-colored folder in Lawrence's hands. They looked like runners coiled at the starting block, waiting only for the gunshot to claim their prize. My son licked his lips, a nervous tic I hadn't seen since he was a boy, trying to lie his way out of breaking a window. Simone sat perfectly still, a marble statue of avarice, her mask of sorrow having been completely forgotten in her eagerness to get to the signing. Finally, Lawrence moved with a slow, deliberate grace that commanded attention. He placed the folder in the exact center of the vast oak desk, its presence feeling as momentous as a treaty between nations. The sound of the heavy paper meeting the polished wood was a soft, definitive thud that echoed in the quiet room. He folded his hands on top of it, looking from Darius to Simone with an unreadable, neutral expression that was far more intimidating than any overt anger. "As you know," he began, his voice calm and measured, "your father's primary concern is to ensure his affairs are in perfect order. He wants this transition to be clear, transparent, and legally unassailable." He paused, letting them nod in eager agreement. "Therefore, we will go through the relevant documentation step by step to ensure full understanding on all sides." He slid the folder across the desk towards Darius. "Let us begin with the first document." This was the moment they had been waiting for. A triumphant, predatory gleam lit up Darius's eyes. He reached for the folder with a hand that trembled slightly, not with weakness, but with the thrill of imminent victory. He clearly believed he was about to hold the keys to my kingdom, the legal instrument that would transfer $8 million of my life's work into his undeserving hands. He cast a quick conspiratorial smile at Simone, a shared look of triumph that was so blatant, so arrogant, it almost made me pity them for the fall that was about to come. Almost. He opened the folder. I watched his face, my own expression remaining one of placid, weary resignation. I watched as his eyes scanned the top of the page. I saw the exact moment the triumphant smile faltered, his eyebrows knitting together in confusion. The document in his hands was not what he was expecting. There were no dense paragraphs of legal jargon about asset transfers or estate planning. Instead, the page was stark clinical, dominated by the official letterhead of the Emory University hospital system. His smile vanished completely, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of disbelief. His eyes darted back and forth across the page, his mind trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he was expecting. The color began to drain from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly pallor. A single bead of sweat trickled down from his temple. Simone, sensing the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere, leaned over, her initial annoyance visible. "What is it, darling?" she whispered impatiently. "Is there a problem? Just sign it." Her eyes fell upon the document in his hands, and her breath hitched in a sharp, audible gasp. Her perfectly manicured hand, the one adorned with my diamonds, flew to her mouth, but this time the shock was entirely genuine. Her eyes widened in horror as she read the words her husband could not seem to process. I knew what they were seeing. My name, Elijah Monroe. The date of admission, December 25th. And below that, a section labeled Toxicology Screen Results, with a single line highlighted in a jarring blood-red color. I knew the words by heart. Patient's blood contains a lethal concentration of digoxin consistent with acute, non-accidental poisoning. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Simone's ragged breathing. It was she who finally broke it, her voice a reedy, trembling whisper that was nothing like the confident musical tone she had used just moments before. "What? What is this?" she stammered, looking wildly from the paper to Lawrence, her eyes wide with panic. "This is some kind of mistake." Lawrence did not move. He remained seated behind his desk, a figure of calm, righteous authority. When he spoke, his voice was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "That Mrs. Monroe," he said, enunciating every syllable with chilling precision, "is a toxicology report certified by the chief of pathology at Emory Hospital. It is the official medical evidence of an attempted murder." He let that phrase hang in the air for a full 3 seconds before continuing. "Specifically, the attempted murder of my client, Mr. Elijah Monroe, which took place on the evening of December 25th at your residence." Darius finally seemed to snap out of his trance. He slammed the folder shut as if the paper itself had burned him. "This is absurd," he blustered, his voice rising in panic. "It's a lie. My father had a health scare, a heart problem, that's all. This is a fabrication, a ridiculous, slanderous fabrication. Larry, what is the meaning of this?" He turned his desperate gaze on me, trying to appeal to the father he had just tried to murder. "Dad, tell them. Tell them this is some kind of horrible mistake. Tell them you were just sick." I met his frantic gaze, and for the first time since they had entered the room, I allowed my expression to change. The mask of the frail, dying old man fell away, replaced by the cold, analytical stare of the auditor who had finally found the fraudulent entry he had been searching for. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. My quiet words cut through his blustering defense with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "There is no mistake, Darius," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of an iron conviction. "The numbers do not lie. Data does not have an agenda. It simply is. And this report," I gestured to the folder on the desk, "is just the first entry in a very long and detailed ledger we are going to review today." The power in the room had shifted completely and irrevocably. The hunters, so confident in their victory, had just heard the distinct click of the trapdoor opening beneath their feet. They were no longer the predators. They were the prey. And they were just beginning to realize the true horrifying extent of the cage they had built for themselves. My son's face was a mess of conflicting emotions. The arrogant confidence he had worn like a tailored suit was gone, replaced by the pale, clammy sheen of pure, unadulterated fear. His eyes, which had moments before held the cold glint of a predator, were now wide and panicked, like a cornered animal searching desperately for an escape route that did not exist. He sputtered, his mouth opening and closing, but no coherent words came out. He was a man whose entire reality had just been upended by a single sheet of paper. His carefully constructed narrative of a sick old man and a tragic natural decline had been utterly demolished by the cold, hard facts of the toxicology report. Simone was no better. Her mask of practiced grief had shattered, leaving behind the raw, ugly face of terror. She stared at the report on the table as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, her knuckles white as she gripped the arms of her chair. They were both trapped in the harsh, unforgiving spotlight of the truth, and the silence in the room was their indictment. I let their panic marinate for a long, delicious moment. I wanted them to feel the walls closing in. I wanted them to understand that this was not a negotiation or a misunderstanding. It was a reckoning. I watched as Darius finally found his voice, a weak, reedy version of its former self. "This is a mistake," he stammered, shaking his head in a frantic, unconvincing denial. "A clerical error at the hospital. Dad, you have to believe me. We would never—" I did not let him finish the lie. My movements were slow, deliberate, as I reached into my briefcase once more and retrieved a second single sheet of paper. I placed it on the polished oak desk and slid it gently across the surface towards them. It came to a rest directly beside the toxicology report. "Perhaps this will jog your memory," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand. It was the printout from his Amazon account. The familiar logo at the top, the order number, the clinical product description of the liquid digoxin, and the damning details of the transaction. But I knew their eyes would be drawn to the two most important lines on the page. The ship to addressed their beautiful mortgage to the Hilt Mansion in Buckhead, and the buyer name, the one that sealed their fate, D. Monroe. Darius stared at the paper, his mouth agape. If the toxicology report had been a body blow, this was the knockout punch. This was not a hospital's potential error. This was his own digital footprint, a ghost from his recent past returned to haunt him, to condemn him. This was the proof of his intent, the premeditated act of a man ordering a weapon online with the casual click of a mouse. He was speechless, utterly and completely defeated by a simple order confirmation. But it was Simone's reaction that truly broke the case wide open. Her head whipped around and she stared at her husband, her fear instantly transmuting into a white-hot, venomous rage. The terror of being caught was suddenly eclipsed by the fury of being caught because of his incompetence. Her voice, when it came out, was a low, guttural hiss of accusation. "You told me you deleted everything." The words hung in the air as damning and irrevocable as a signed confession. She had done it. In a single panicked outburst, she had admitted her knowledge, her complicity. She had just confirmed the conspiracy. I saw the immediate regret flash in her eyes as she realized what she had said. She clapped a hand over her mouth, but it was far too late. The words were out, and they could never be taken back. She had just implicated them both. Darius looked at his wife, his expression one of utter betrayal. Their united front, their partnership in crime, had just crumbled into dust. He turned back to us, his desperation now pathetic to behold. "It's a fake," he cried, his voice cracking. "That's a photoshopped document. Someone is trying to frame us. Someone hacked my account. They bought that and had it sent to our house to make us look guilty." Lawrence leaned forward, a dry, humorless smile touching his lips. "An interesting theory, Mr. Monroe," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So you are positing that there is a criminal mastermind out there who not only has the skill to hack your online accounts, but also happened to know that your father would be at your house for Christmas dinner, and further would be drinking from a specific glass of water that they could poison from afar. I imagine the Atlanta Police Department will find that explanation lacking in credibility." The final flimsy structure of their denial had been demolished. It was my turn to speak. I leaned forward, my voice no longer the quiet whisper of a victim, but the hard, resonant tone of a judge. "Framed Darius," I asked, my eyes boring into his. "Let's examine that theory as if it were a financial statement. Who among your enemies has a key to your home? Who else knew the seating arrangement at your Christmas dinner table? Who else could have ensured that I, and only I, received that specific glass of water?" I let each question land with the force of a hammer blow. "And let's look at the motive, shall we? Who else in the world besides the two of you stood to gain $2 million from my immediate death?" They had no answer. There was no answer. They were trapped, exposed, and utterly condemned by the evidence, by their own greed, and now by their own words. The audit was nearly complete. All that remained was to deliver the final devastating balance sheet. My son and his wife were broken. Darius stared at the receipt on the desk, his face a hollow mask of disbelief. Simone was muttering to herself, her eyes wide with a terror that had finally consumed her anger. Their pathetic denials had crumbled their lies, exposed by the unassailable weight of the evidence. They were caught, and they knew it. But I was not finished. The police could give them justice for the crime they attempted. I was here to deliver the consequences for the betrayal they had perfected. A prison sentence would punish their actions, but it would not address the rot in their souls, the insatiable greed that had led them to this room. That required a different kind of judgment. My movements were unhurried as I reached into my briefcase one last time. I retrieved the third and final folder. It was thicker than the others, bound in a formal blue cover. I did not slide it across the desk. Instead, I stood up, walked around the desk, and placed it directly in front of my son, with a soft, final thud. He flinched as if the folder itself were hot to the touch. "And this, Darius," I said, my voice quiet, yet it seemed to fill the entire room. "This is the true legacy I am leaving you." With trembling hands, he opened the cover. He read the title aloud, his voice a hoarse whisper. "The Monroe Family Irrevocable Trust." He looked up at me, his eyes clouded with confusion. Simone leaned in her face, a question mark. I returned to my chair and folded my hands, my work as an investigator now complete. It was time for the final summation. 6 months ago, Darius the First began, my voice calm and methodical. "You came to me and asked for $50,000. I saw the desperation in your eyes then. I saw the way you were living, the lies you were telling yourselves and the world. I saw the path you were on and I feared where it might lead. So I took precautions. I met with Lawrence and we created that trust. I leaned forward slightly. Let me explain what irrevocable means. It means the assets within it, my entire $8 million estate, cannot be touched or altered. Not by me, not by you, not by anyone. The rules of the trust are absolute, as binding as the laws of mathematics. I let that sink in before delivering the final blow, and deep within that trust there is a specific provision, a clause I authored myself. Lawrence and I call it the felony clause. I looked from my son's terrified face to my daughter-in-law's. The clause is quite simple. It states that if the primary beneficiary, that's you, Darius, is ever convicted of a felony crime or is proven through credible evidence to be involved in my unnatural death or incapacitation, your status as a beneficiary is immediately and permanently terminated. I paused, allowing them to absorb the full weight of my words before I delivered the final, devastating sentence. The clause further stipulates that in such an event, the entire $8 million principal of the trust, down to the last penny, will be immediately and automatically donated in its entirety to the National Scholarship Fund for disadvantaged African American students. The air in the room seemed to crystallize. The brutal, perfect, and inescapable nature of the trap was finally revealed. This was the checkmate. The truth hit them like a physical blow. Their desperate, evil gamble for a $2 million insurance payout had not only failed, it had just cost them the $8 million they had been guaranteed to inherit. Their greed had not just left them with nothing, it had vaporized everything. In their attempt to steal my future, they had single-handedly annihilated their own. They were not just criminals. They were the architects of their own spectacular, irreversible ruin. The finality of my words hung in the air, thick and heavy as a shroud. For a long moment, there was only the sound of Simone's ragged, broken sobs. Darius stared at the trust document on the table, his mind finally comprehending the full catastrophic scale of his miscalculation. He had not just lost. He had been surgically, intellectually, and completely dismantled. The $8 million he had considered his birthright, the $2 million he had tried to kill me for, it had all vanished into thin air, vaporized by a single clause born of his own monstrous greed. Then something inside him snapped. The hollow look of defeat in his eyes was consumed by a sudden wildfire of pure animalistic rage. It was the impotent fury of a cornered predator, the last violent thrashing of a creature with nothing left to lose. With a guttural roar that seemed to tear from the very depths of his soul, he lunged across the desk, his hands outstretched not for the documents but for my throat. "You!" he screamed, his face a contorted mask of hatred. "You did this. It was always yours and you gave it away." Lawrence shouted my name and started to rise from his chair, but he was too slow. The carefully orchestrated calm of the office exploded into sudden, shocking violence. A heavy crystal paperweight skittered across the desk and a stack of legal files cascaded to the floor. Darius was nearly on top of me, his eyes blazing with a madness I had never seen before, but he never reached me. The heavy oak doors to the office burst open with such force that they slammed against the interior walls. Two men, large and imposing in dark suits, moved into the room with a speed and efficiency that spoke of years of training. They were detectives with the Atlanta Police Department, and their timing was, as I had planned with Lawrence, absolutely perfect. One detective intercepted my son's lunge, grabbing his arms and twisting him away from me with practiced ease. Darius struggled, still screaming obscenities, but he was no match for the detective's strength. The other detective walked calmly towards a hysterical Simone who was now weeping uncontrollably into her hands. The lead detective, a tall man with a calm, authoritative presence, spoke, his voice cutting cleanly through the chaos. "Darius Monroe and Simone Monroe," he said, his tone flat and official, leaving no room for argument. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree and for felony insurance fraud." The click of the handcuffs snapping around my son's wrists was a sound of absolute finality. Simone didn't resist. She simply slumped forward as her hands were secured behind her back. Her expensive dress rumpled her perfect facade, now a tear-stained ruin. "You have the right to remain silent." The detective continued reciting the Miranda rights as his partner led my sobbing daughter-in-law towards the door. But the final act of this tragedy was yet to come. Just as Darius was being escorted out, another man stepped into the doorway. He was dressed in a conservative, almost bland suit, and he held a leather portfolio under his arm. He exuded an aura of quiet bureaucratic menace that was somehow more intimidating than the detective's physical presence. He nodded to the lead detective and then turned his attention to my son and his wife. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice polite but chillingly devoid of emotion. "My name is Agent Harris. I'm with the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service." He opened his portfolio and produced a warrant. "In addition to the charges you currently face, we also have a federal warrant to investigate you and your associated businesses for multiple counts of tax fraud and suspected money laundering. If there was any fight left in Darius, it died in that moment." The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly ashen gray. He finally understood. This was not just about the failed murder plot. This was about everything. The lies, the cars, the watches, the house, the entire fraudulent empire they had built on a foundation of debt and deceit was about to be torn down piece by piece and examined under the unforgiving microscope of the federal government. It was total, complete, and utter annihilation. And Elijah Monroe, watched it all unfold from the calm sanctuary of my leather armchair. I felt no surge of triumph, no satisfying rush of vengeance. The sight of my only son being led away in handcuffs, his life in ruins, brought me no joy. Instead, a profound and unexpected sense of peace settled over me. It was the quiet, deep satisfaction of a master auditor who, after a long and arduous investigation, has finally balanced the books. The complex, painful equation of my life had been solved. The fraudulent entries had been found and corrected. The final ledger was now clean. And in the sudden, blessed silence of the empty room, I found not victory, but order. 3 months later, the world had found its equilibrium again. Spring had arrived in Atlanta, and from the window of my home office I could see the dogwood trees in my garden exploding in a riot of white and pink blossoms. The harsh, cold reality of that Christmas night felt like a distant memory, a closed ledger from a previous fiscal year. The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence, Darius and Simone had been convicted on all charges. Their assets, the cars, the watches, the house built on a foundation of lies, were seized by the IRS to pay for their years of fraud. Their downfall was as total as it was absolute. I had followed the proceedings from a distance through Lawrence. I felt no victory as the verdicts were read, no sense of triumph as the sentences were handed down. There was only a quiet, somber sense of necessity, the grim satisfaction of a surgeon who has successfully removed a cancer. The procedure was painful and invasive, but essential for the health of the whole. The books had been audited, the fraudulent accounts closed, and the painful but necessary corrections had been made. Now, in the quiet of my sunlit office, I was performing one final act of accounting. On my desk lay a stack of freshly printed legal documents. I picked up my favorite fountain pen, the one my late wife Eleanor had given me for my 40th birthday. Its weight was familiar and comforting in my hand. I was not signing a business deal or a tax return. I was signing into existence the Eleanor Monroe Scholarship for Integrity in Accounting, a substantial fund dedicated to helping gifted, underprivileged students pursue a career in forensic accounting. As I read over the charter one last time, the truth of my journey settled upon me with a profound clarity. I had spent my life building a financial legacy, an $8 million testament to my hard work, all with the intention of passing it on to my only son. But I had made a fundamental accounting error. I had focused on the balance sheet, on the assets and the numbers, and I had failed to properly audit the character of the heir. A legacy is not a number in a bank account. True legacy is the values you instill, the opportunities you create, the integrity you model for the next generation. My son had proven himself unworthy of the inheritance, so I would now invest it in those who might prove worthy of the principal. My final audit, the one that began on that terrible Christmas night, was never about punishment. It was about restoration. It was about balancing the books on a cosmic scale. I was taking the money that had been the motive for a dark and hateful act, and I was transforming it. I was converting it from a source of greed into a wellspring of opportunity. I was turning the ugliest chapter of my life into the brightest hope for countless young people I would never meet. The darkness my son had created would be used to fuel the light of someone else's future. I uncapped the pen. The scratching sound of the nib on the thick formal paper was the only sound in the room. I signed my name, Elijah Monroe, at the bottom of the page. The signature was not the shaky scrawl of a victim, but the firm, confident hand of a man who was once again the sole author of his own story. I had closed the ledger on my past and opened a new one for the future. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at my garden at the new life blooming everywhere I looked. A deep, resonant peace, the kind I had not felt in years, settled into my soul. The numbers, the evidence, the betrayal, it all faded away, leaving only this quiet, sunlit room and the knowledge that I had done the right thing. The accounts were reconciled. The audit was complete. The books were finally and perfectly balanced. Greed builds a cage of its own making. When you plot to steal another's future, you only succeed in forfeiting your own. True wealth is not what you can take, but the integrity you refuse to surrender, even when betrayed by those you should have been able to trust.